Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Patrick Crouch from the Carlton Footy Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Gorn, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. We are back a handful of days now into the 50 most relevant, number 46 today. And while we might only have had a chance to talk about just a handful of players, we're into the ruck line yet again. Matthew Flynn, the West Coast Eagle, is in at number 46 in this list to talk about why he's there, the relevance that he holds for us across the entirety of the platforms that we play, and the reason he's made it into this listing. I had to get one of my favourites that we fell in love with during the preseason last year. If you're a part of the Dr. SuperCoach community, you're very familiar with this man. And if you play SuperCoach and you're not following what he and the Dr. SuperCoach guys are doing, especially around the conversation around rucks and captaincy, you're missing a trick. This man knows his stuff, and he's going to help us on this episode as well. Pig Mentality from Dr. Supercoach. Hello, mate. Nice to see you. And Matthew Flynn's a pretty interesting player to talk about, isn't he?
He is. Thanks for having me on, MJ. It's always a pleasure to come on and chat to you, see your face on the video, and have a waffle usually about rucks. It's a bit of a pet favourite of mine. And Matt Flynn, I think he's a really, really interesting one this year that might be flying under some people's radars, but we want to have a chat about him and potentially make people have a little thought about what Matt Flynn could do.
Not too many games last year, just the 4 games, pretty much a flat line average of 61 across all of your formats. And due to some underperforming seasons and injury being the predominant reason for only playing the 4 games, he is priced in a couple of the formats at a really nice sweet spot for us, specifically in SuperCoach. He's just over that $260,000 marker, which is incredible value when you contrast him to what it looks to go and get a Sam Lawler as our number 1 and most expensive rookie off the board. It's not that far of a leap up to go and get into the Matt Flynn territories. A little bit higher in the other formats due to their pricing cycle, but you've also got more money to play with. He's just on $622K in AFL Fantasy and just a touch under the $500,000 marker in Dream Team. But Pig, he's the kind of ruckman that, again, if you don't really follow the GWS Giants or not really across that trade that happened probably about 14, 15 months ago now, from the Giants to the Eagles, you're not super familiar with the style of player he is, but he's a really nice ruck asset. His ability to hit his targets with his hit-outs to advantage, quite favourable. I know we want to talk about that throughout this podcast as well, but he is a pretty impressive ruckman. Yes, injuries have certainly hurt him, but there was a period of time there at GWS back in 2023 where it was, is Flynn the number 1 ruck? Is Briggs the number 1 ruck? And for at least half of that season, it was a genuine battle between who was the number 1 guy at the Giants.
Yeah, and I think it could be a case where now that those two have split up, they could each go and dominate at their respective teams. So it's just seen Briggs have a primo season in recent memory at GWS, and I think Flynn, they're kind of different ruckmen in a way, but and we'll go in and talk about this a bit, but Flynn is a really, really good tap hit-out ruckman. He wins 47% of his hit-outs on average over his career, and that's some really big numbers. I guess, we could even talk about that now, that 47% hit out, that's really high. So the big guys, the best in the league, Riley O'Brien, Jared Witt, Sean Darcy, they win the hit out in 50% of their ruck contests. So that's like the gold A+ standard. Guys like Tim English and Rowan Marshall, they only win it at 37%. So they're way down there. And then if we look at the set and forget guys of Max Gawn and Brodie Grundy, they're 47% type operators. So the fact that Flynn matches them, he wins around roughly 47% of his ruck contests over his career. What that means for ruckman, it just gives them a lot of free points. If you win hitouts, if it's SuperCoach, and especially if it's a hitout to advantage, it's a big boost. But even the other formats, you get +1 for a hitout, and let's say you get 30 a game. That's your base floor of 30 points just there like that. So I like a ruckman that can win a large percentage of his hitouts, and that's what Flynn does. And
I think that is a really valid point that you've brought out, that ability to be comparable, if not best, some of these other really SuperCoach and AFL fantasy relevant rucks from a hit out percentage. Not only do we know that is such a favourable scoring component of where points come for us in SuperCoach, but in AFL fantasy, as you've alluded to, that's just such a strong foundational floor that he can really build his scoring off. And while it's different in the sense of the quality of midfield that the Giants had in 2022 and 2023 while he was there, does give us some confidence that if we look at those two seasons specifically, we do see a guy that when he's number one ruck, he's got some scoring components in us. Now, there are the injury concerns, and we'll get to those in a moment, but 2023, 9 games, gives us an AFL fantasy average of 73 with a ton through there, while in SuperCoach, much higher. And again, that's that hit out to advantage where he's going to see that benefit, given that you've already alluded to that. 84 or 88 average, should I say, rather, in 2023. 6 games 80 plus, including a 101 and a 132, while the 12 games in 2022, 68. 6 of those scores are 60 plus, including 2 tons, while 5 tons from 12 games in SuperCoach, another average of 84, and that includes a 119, a 122, and a 133. Now, those averages of 80s and 60s and 70s peak normally don't really entice selection into you, but when you're picking a guy that in Dream Team in SuperCoach is priced pretty much at a 50, and he's priced at a 60 range for us in Dream Team, he's really got one simple job to do. Make us some money, bank us some points, and all of a sudden, you have done your job. And you've already mapped out the pathway of how it's going to happen, which will be if he's the number one ruck and largely and predominantly through hitouts. So I want to ask you a question. Bailey Williams has been the number one ruck really since Nick Naitanui has retired. And I think that's more by injury default rather than by design, certainly over in the last 12 months. But what's your take on this? Is Flynn a lock for the number one spot? Do you believe he's battling for Bailey Williams for it? How do you think this West Coast ruck is really going to shake up for us? Because that really does determine whether or not, regardless of the perceived value he might have in this role, if he's not going to get it, he becomes irrelevant for us.
Yeah, no, you're right. And look, at the moment, I think it's Matt Flynn's for the taking, with Bailey Williams actually probably being more as a key forward. I know whenever it was, you said about 14, 15 months ago, when they brought Flynn over, the chat out of West Coast then was that they see Bailey Williams as a key forward and Flynn will come in and be the ruckman. Now, obviously, a fair bit of time's passed since then, so we actually need to see it happen, and we need to see it in pre-season, see what messaging comes out of West Coast. But my gut feeling is that it's probably going to be Flynn if he can stay in the park, and that is a fair worry. But if Flynn's healthy, I think he's going to be the number one ruck, and Bailey Williams will probably learn his craft as a key forward. But we'll see how we go. Just see how it goes throughout the preseason, and that's it. Because, one of the things I'm looking at here with ruckman is the big dogs, the good premium ruckmen. There's a couple of metrics that they all kind of sit around. So they all get about, when they're playing, they attend about 75% of their team's ruck contests, and they have about 80% time on ground. They're kind of the two things, Rowan Marshall, Tim English, Gawn and Grundy, that they all hit those marks. So that's what I would love to see Flynn get, that 75%, 25 split. If it's a bit more like the Darcy Cameron, Mason Cox split that we've had previously, where it's more like 65-30, I'm not really as interested, but I still think even with that, he could make us a bit of money. Because in those years in the Giants, he was only about 60% of the team's ruck contest at the Giants then. He wasn't like the dominant 75% of the contest. He was only seeing 60%, and he still averaged that 86 across those 3 years at GWS. So all he needs to do is average that 86 again that he's done for 3 years at GWS, and he's making us a lot of money.
Yeah, there is a way.
That's kind of where I sit with that.
Yeah, there's a way. I agree to him generating a lot of cash, and you contrast Williams as the number one ruck. Just remember, 15 months ago, they went out of their way to trade for him because he is not servicing the ball to this midfield. And for developing in a young side like the Eagles are, granted they've got some statesman midfielders with the likes of Kelly and Yo. We're talking about a player that when in that ruck position has got one of the lowest hit-outs to advantage wins across the league. For a guy that had been a number one ruck, like we're talking 33, 34, 35%, 38% was what he did in 2023, 33% last year. Yeah, that's right. So I just don't see a guy that when you've got a midfield that archetype build is Reed and Yo, these powerful midfielders, then you've got this kind of accumulator type in Tim Kelly, who's that little bit of ability to, add some speed and skill. They just have to be winning the ball. They don't have those fits yet to be able to just scoop off other ruckmen. And Flynn coming into this number one ruck spot just enables them to look so much stronger as a midfield unit, enables Reed and Yo to play to their strengths, enables Kelly, who's capable of winning clearance, but is much better second touch footballer, to all of a sudden now this midfield can function a little bit better. And I just see Flynn as the way that gets them through that. But one of the things that you've also done for us, Pig, is not only have you talked about these metrics to success for premium rucks, there is some indicators that we should be looking at to see whether a player can break out. Now, that breakout, let's use SuperCoach, which is the predominant U format you play and run. I know you do the others as well, but if we were to say a breakout is 100, what are the pathways that from a ruck, and how does Flynn sit into that? Because that might feel like the absolute ceiling of what he could do, and it probably is. But what are some of the indicators you've seen previously that maybe Flynn could learn to lean into and give us some nice scoring?
Yeah, absolutely. So last preseason, I did have a look at this. I looked at ruckmen who had the potential to break out and become, like kind of as you said, we'll call them first-time premiums. So the first time they've scored 100 SuperCoach. So I look back over the last 5 years and there were 9 ruckmen who have broken out in that time. So, we think about guys like Toby Nankervis and Kieran Briggs did in 2023, Sean Darcy 2021, English 2020, and Rowan Marshall in 2019. So they're kind of the names. There are some other names, but they're like the big ones. So I looked at prior to their breakout year, what statistics did they have? I guess what was the common trend? And it kind of gave me a filter to run through other rucks that haven't broken out yet. So, for example, all ruckmen who became premiums over the last 5 years, they'd all averaged at least 9.5 disposals, 2.3 tackles, 9 hitouts, before their breakout season. So, even Kieran Briggs playing as a backup to Mumford, he wasn't getting that much game time and he could still hit those marks. But it just shows like a bit of an all-round game, because being able to get the marks, get around the ground and get disposal marks, as well as laying tackles and getting hit outs. There's kind of a bit of a baseline, and it's not a perfect science because this filter did miss Tristan Cherry's breakout last year, because prior to last year, Cherry just did not get any marks or disposals, but he made that look foolish last year. So it's not amazing. Like it's not foolproof, but it did identify some players that if they're given the main ruck duties, I think they have the fantasy pedigree to score over 100 SuperCoach. So this filter, when I put it through, it identified some players. This time last year, it identified guys like Lloyd Meek, Tom De Koning, and Darcy Cameron as ruckmen that if they get their fantasy points from a wide variety of sources, and it means that they should be able to do enough to become a premium ruckman if they hit those, 75% ruck contests, 80% time on ground that I was talking about before. So it just gave me a way to think, if this player could be a solo ruck, I think he could average 100. And all of those 3 players that I mentioned did, Meek, De Koning, and Cameron. And the other player that fits the bill that you might have guessed from this podcast is Matt Flynn. So Matt does have a really good scoring profile. he eclipses all those filters that I'm looking for. He gets enough marks and disposals. He lays enough tackles, gets enough hit-outs. So he's someone that hasn't had the opportunity yet, I don't believe. Some of that is because of injury. But he's someone that if he gets that opportunity to be the main ruck of the team, I could see him averaging 100 SuperCoach this year. I'm not saying he will necessarily because there's a lot has to go right. But I think he's got that pedigree. He's got the game makeup. And like we said, he is so cheap that even if he doesn't average 100, even if he just goes back to his 86 average that he did at the Giants, it's a lot of money. And there's also, something to be said about not filling up both of your ruck slots with a set and forget and not being able to pivot to someone. I mean, me, for example, last year, I started with Gawn and English, and this filter said Lloyd Meek, if he is solo ruck, will average 100. And then because I had Gawn and English, I had no way to get Meek. So I actually felt like I lost out on whatever it was, 200,000 that Meek made. Didn't get that opportunity. And I don't really want that to happen again. And it's different this year with our flex spot. We might be able to chuck them there. But
yeah,
I think there is something to be said to not locking your two rucks in from round zero.
Well, we've seen this now over the last just 4 years alone. We can always go back further through the corridor of time if we want to, but the last 4 years, who are the top two averaging rucks? Well, in AFL Fantasy, Marshall and Cherry, then English and Marshall, Gawn and English, and back to Gawn and Grundy, while in SuperCoach, Gawn and Cherry, English and Marshall, Gawn and Witts, Gawn and Darcy. Now, again, points versus average, they might be a little bit of a different conversation, but history would certainly suggest that it is on the rarer side than not that both top two rucks repeat. Now, Gawn seems to be a little bit of the aberration in SuperCoach with 3 of the last 4 and probably more if we wanted to go a little bit deeper. Marshall's got the last 2 years in fantasy. Before that, the 2 years prior, Gawn was there. But we are talking about the rarity of number 1 and 2, backing that up. And as you mentioned, well, you lock yourself with English, all of a sudden you can't get Cherry. You don't get that money made. You can't get a Meek. You can't get that money made. You can't get that value that does seem to arrive really strongly and predominantly. And one of the reasons why I've got Matt Flynn inside this 50 most relevant, and there's a couple, but one for me is I do think he's the clear number 1 ruck. I don't see a Bailey Williams being that guy. I think Harry Barnett, who they also drafted a few years ago, might develop into a fine player, but I don't think he's there at that competitive phase, meaning if he can get through his injuries, which is the big if, to me, he's the number 1 ruck. And if he's the number 1 ruck, he screams incredible value, not just for the money he can make, not just for the security that it create for you with getting that look at the top 2 rucks, which we talked about on the number 50 player in Sean Darcy. But what it also does with flex in Dream Team and SuperCoach is it gives you another money-making avenue. Can you imagine last year, Pig, if we had the flex for us? Well, Cherry, Meek, just those 2 guys alone were 2 of the biggest money makers because number 1 rucks in a format that suits and favors the ruck scoring. To me, this does look like all of the things are stacking up. No early buy, presents value, proven performer. Yes, has got an injury risk, but you can mitigate that with no real hesitancy with 2 real core reasons. The flex, meaning your worst score drops off in any week regardless, let alone round 2, 3, and 4. It's best 18. And you've got an extra spot on field in SuperCoach and Dream Team to get you to this best 18. So you can build the risk profile of your side, especially in those 2 formats, incredibly with a little bit higher risk than last year because you're protected in so many ways, let alone the trades that you can flick the switch on. So to me, the variables and the reasons for why I'm prepared to run the gauntlet of jumping on Flynn feels pretty high. And before we get too far into this Matt Flynn or bust and all of a sudden MJ sounds like he should be top 10 and not sitting at 46, is while all these reasons do stack up, he does have to come out of the gate and deliver not just a 60s or a 70s average. We do need a strong start from him. And while we might be protected with the injury risks with best 18s and a dropping off score in Dream Team and Supercoach due to a flex spot, if he doesn't score well in those first 5 to 6 weeks due to his opponent, we can kiss all these, hyperbolic excitement reasons goodbye, because it's going to stall for us. So let's look at that first couple of weeks, Pig. Is it a favourable fixture? And not just from a historical perspective, but also the people he's up against. What's your reading of the tea leaves about Matt Flynn's chances of scoring well in the first month or so of the year?
Yeah, the first 3 weeks is tough, we'll be honest. And ruckmen are real. They go head to head, 1-on-1 so often that you can actually really just say which ruckman will he be playing this week, and often it really does reflect their score. Whereas a midfielder, they could run through 5 or 6 different opponents on the day, but the ruckmen generally do go head to head. So it is something really important to look at, and his first 3 weeks are really tough. He comes up against Jared Witts, Oscar McInerney, then Sean Darcy in his first 3 weeks. And Witts and Darcy especially, they're probably two of the most restrictive ruckmen in the game. So I don't really expect Flynn to come out and kind of give us 300s to start the year. But, if he gets us, if he could average 70 during that time, I wouldn't, like, if you started him and he goes 70, 70, 70, I wouldn't be trading him out, because if he's got, the main ruck role, because after that, it does get easier. He comes into matchups with Kieran Briggs, Tom DeConing, Sam Draper, Lloyd Meek. None of those players are restrictive. They don't win the hit out. He wins the hit out more than all of those guys. So I'd expect him to be able to at least, boost his stats from a hit out perspective in that kind of weeks 4 to 7. So it is a tough one that I would have liked him to have, an easier start so he can really start the ball rolling. But he's also not someone that I'd probably look to cash out in the first 2 months anyway. He has the round 15 buy, so that's one of the later buys. So he's actually someone that I would probably run all the way through to that round 15 buy, and because he gives you coverage for those first the buys at the start of the year. He also gives you coverage for most of those buys in the mid-season, and then there's some really, really good players coming off their buy as he goes on to their buy in the mid-season. So you could flip him to Rowan Marshall, Tim English, Tristan Cherry, Tom DeConing, Nankervis, Grundy. That all will have had their buy by the time Flynn jumps on his buy. So yes, his first 3 weeks are tough. That does suck, and it means he won't probably be ramping up the cash straight away. But his weeks 4 to 7 are actually really nice, so a really good run. But he is someone that I think is probably a slower potential burn, and I'd just hold him through the buys until and by that mid-season, you probably identified who the best two ruckmen are. So whether it's Marshall, whether it's Jerry, whoever it is, DeConing, coming off their buy, Flynn's a pretty easy flip there, and hopefully he's made us 200k by then if he's even back to his GWS averaging days. So yeah, it's not an ideal first 3 weeks, but I think we look a little bit longer than we would with some other cash cows.
It is going to be a hard junction for us coming at the end of round 2, where a bunch of teams are already going to have had their first price cycle movement, those that are played in opening round, whereas Flynn will be sitting, in theory, if he's played both games, on the bubble. In Supercoach and Dream Team, where that 3 price cycle movement, that ability to do that trade boost, it's going to be hard, especially if the likes of Marshall, Cherry, Gawn, English, if he can rebound back to his 2023 scoring seasons, all come out strong. Or if a Tom DeConing, who's a popular name, wonder if he makes the 50 most relevant or not, we'll find out. A Sean Darcy, who we've already included into this year's countdown, he was at number 50, amongst others. He gets to that awkward spot in Supercoach and Dream Team where it's like, I know Pick Mentality told me about the 3 challenging weeks to start, and I know the run's there, but the money's not moving, and others are either getting away from me or others are breaking out and delivering, while in AFL Fantasy, he's had a couple of price movements, and so now if it's not happening at this point, he's really going to need a monster score, and by a monster I mean 100 plus, to get that cash generation moving at a decent rate and not just have him for 10 weeks and make $80,000 in AFL Fantasy. It does get to this hard friction point of the year between discipline and knowing what you know versus all the other indicators of now are saying jump off. Now, that's obviously on the premise that he doesn't fly out of the gate, which we're more saying is unlikely than likely due to his opponents. But that is going to be an interesting junction in the year, isn't it? I know you've done some price projection stuff for us as well, but those first couple of weeks, if he only goes 70, he's still going above his price point. He's still making you money. But if any of the other rucks that are breaking out or the top line guys just knock the door down how they ended the year, it's going to be a tough hold at the end of round 2, isn't it?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think the key here is going to be trying to not compare him to the premium rucks because he's not a premium ruck. To me, he's a stepping stone. He's a cash generator. I'd treat him like an expensive rookie, essentially. So if you've got Matt Flynn instead of Tristan Cherry, it probably means somewhere else, you might have Bont instead of someone much, much lesser. So hopefully you're making the points difference up somewhere else, but Flynn's a better cash generator than a rookie is kind of how I'm going to look at it. Because, I think Flynn's got 100 average potential, even if it's 86. That's probably still better than all of the rookies. Yes, he costs a little bit more, but that's how I'm looking at it. So, yeah, if you have Flynn in your ruck spot and you're seeing Marshall come out, go 130s, hopefully you've spent that money somewhere else where your Bont or your Butters or someone else is going 130 to kind of cancel that, and then your Flynn's beating the rookie.
Yeah, no, I think that's...
Yeah, and it will be tough, you're right.
It's a helpful way to look at it, though, isn't it? We can't just apple and apple these guys. We've got to go with the money you're saving by choosing Flynn at R2 or your flex spot in Dream Team and SuperCoach versus these other investment opportunities. You do need to look at it in that more totalitarian perspective to be able to get you there. I think if you're looking for a player that has got money-making potential, Flynn needs to be a consideration. If you're looking for a player that is playing in a position that is favourable for scoring across all the scoring the platforms, not just in SuperCoach, then Flynn needs to be a consideration. If you're not confident that the top line rucks are going to be clear and supreme about who the best 2 are, then Flynn needs to be a consideration. If you're worried about the injury risk, the good news is 3 of those first 4 weeks in AFL Fantasy, you're protected with Best 18, while in SuperCoach and Dream Team, you're always protected because the worst score is going to drop out of your on-field Best 23, enabling you to take a risk on maybe that extra injury-prone player, which Flynn certainly has sat in that category of his career. All of these variables mean Flynn needs to be a consideration. And that's all we're trying to do on this episode of the 50 Most Relevant. Is he in your R1, R2? He better not be your R1. That's a little too high. But is he your R2 or your flex? Well, he sits and enables all of those reasons for you. And that's what makes him so relevant, why he's in this list. Mate, where does he go on draft day, though, for coaches that play in the drafting platforms? Is he going to get picked up on draft day in your eyes? Or do you think he just sneaks his way to the waiver wire? Ultimately, we know the amount of coaches and rucks on field determine everything, but in an average 10-team League One ruck on field, do you see him getting picked up on draft day?
He definitely won't go in the top 10 rucks, and that's fair enough. I wouldn't want him to. But I actually think he's a really good backup ruck, especially if you're taking someone a little bit riskier, like say you're going Sean Darcy, like you and Mini Monk discussed on number 50. Sean Darcy's got a big injury history, so if you can grab a ruck right at the end of the draft that Pig saying could easily do 90s in Supercoach. I think that's a pretty good fallback. It's kind of like, I know last year people were grabbing someone like Todd Goldstein at the end of the draft just as he probably wasn't going to be on the field. He was just going to be a backup if your main ruck got injured. And I think Flynn could kind of fit that bill pretty comfortably. I think you could get a bit of he could be a bit of a sleeper that some people are missing if he gets the number one ruck role. And look, you just gave a really good summary then, but everything that we are saying now hinges on what we see in the preseason. If Flynn is healthy, if he looks like he's the number one ruck, all of what we said checks out. If it's going to be a ruck split with Bailey Williams or someone else, I'm not really interested. So, we're recording this on the first day of January, so a lot can change between now and the first day of the season. But yeah, I really think we need to keep an eye on it. If he's number one ruck, I really like him. If he's not, I'm not interested. But you could get him quite late in a draft.
Yeah, it's a good summary, mate. I'm with you. He could present late round value, but he could also be just sitting there on the waiver wire and may even get thrown back into the pool should some of those concerned early matchups that Pigs alluded to us go a little pear-shaped for him. He could go well in them too. He's scored well against good rucks before. He's not just a bully. But let's wait and see. Is he relevant? Absolutely, across all the formats. And, mate, I love talking about rucks with you. I love talking about SuperCoach and AFL Fantasy with you. That is for sure, mate. Hey, where can people get in touch with you and the team at Dr. SuperCoach this preseason? I know you guys have a ton of content that's planned to come for the community.
Yeah, well, I'm on Twitter at pig_DRSC. There's all the other boys as well. So there's the main Dr. SuperCoach page on Twitter. JB, Chizo, and Pistol are on there as well. We've got Dr. SuperCoach YouTube, Dr. SuperCoach Patreon, which gets you access to a Slack with, I think, about 600 like-minded SuperCoach lovers, which is a really great way to bounce ideas off people. And yeah, so they're kind of our main things, but we'll be kind of ramping up in the next little bit as well and producing some content. But for now, it's been awesome to jump on and chat a ruck with you again, MJ.
We might have a few more rucks in the 50. Who knows? We might need to sneak the great man back on. Yeah, 2 in the first 5 days. That's it. We're done. A ruckless 50. No, not at all. There is a few more to roll through. If you want to catch up on any of those links or places that was just shared about where you can get in touch with Pig or the Dr. SuperCoach guys and their Patreon, we've put all those details in the description of this episode. In about 30 seconds, I got a clue for you who is at number 45. So hang on tight. I know you love the guessing game. Who's at 45? Let's see. You got 30 seconds to prepare yourself, and then I'm going to give you a clue. If you want to go back in time and look at all of the other players we've revealed so far through the 50 most relevant, you can do so on this channel. If you haven't watched one of these episodes on the 50 most relevant, you need to jump over to YouTube, subscribe to the Coaches Panel, like this video if you are watching. Make sure you like this video and comment below. What do you think Matthew Flynn is going to average this year across the formats? If you're watching this as a video, comment below. If you're listening to this as an audio podcast and you haven't followed the channel and given it a 5-star rating, we'd love you to do so. It's one of those small, simple things you could do that actually makes a real significant difference. You can keep in touch with the rest of the boys from the Coaches Panel, gain access to some Coaches Panel merch, and get access to our Patreon, where they also, our Breakout and Premium tiers, are getting the audio podcast a day ahead. So they already know what this clue is alluding to. So if you want to do that, join and find out all the details for our Patreon, as well as the Dr. SuperCoach one, in the details of this episode. All right, I've strung it out enough. Number 45. Before I tell you a clue about the player, I'll tell you about our guest, because that might just point you in the right direction. During the preseason, right at the very start of it, yep, we've been going since December. Yeah, that's how long the preseason's been going. We sat down with Dylan Alexander, the draft guru, who did a 10 most relevant rookies video and audio podcast with us. If you were following the AFL draft that just went gone, chances are, if you were going through YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, trying to find AFL draft content about the players you were thinking your club might land, you saw this guy on a podcast or a video episode somewhere talking about the crop of kids. So if I'm getting Dylan involved in the podcast, am I going to talk about someone from a recently drafted AFL class? Or am I swerving you and he's talking about his beloved North Melbourne? You'll find out tomorrow in the 50 Most Relevant.